Pariyatti Audiobooks presents Introduction from Journey of Insight Meditation by Eric Lerner, as read by Jonathan Nelson.
Introduction. As the world advanced into the early 70s, I felt strangely dislocated. I really couldn't accept that the 60s had so quickly become an era in the past tense. I tried to remind myself that, if only for a brief time, the mind of my generation had been wide open to experiences, perceptions of the universe, and modes of life whose power and truth contradicted a lifetime of convention. For a while, through chemicals, a wholly other state of being seemed possible. In the initial hour's rush of my first dose of mescaline, that surge in which my perceptions set out on their own, I was freed for the first time from my conceptions, and the world of accomplishment and prestige became someone else's bad dream. But somehow, I was still the same. Despite the incredible visions of truth I had experienced, I was no more peaceful or loving than ever. And as the visions became memories, I began to experience the most profound disorientation. Nothing made sense. Almost overnight, I had given up most of the beliefs and operating principles of 20 years. I was ready to give up old explanations as long as I had a new one. But mescaline is strangely silent. Nothing hangs together long enough to be coherent. The friend who had guided me on my drug travels was a spiritual teacher who specialized, like Shiva, in the destruction of concepts. When I visited him in the hospital, where he was recovering from a nervous breakdown, he had little to say. Reluctantly, I turned to the mind-expanding movement whose style had always repelled me. Like the drugs that spawned it, the culture was effusive, vague, and hard to incorporate into a steady diet. The psychedelic experts were children like myself, groping with strange substances and playing with practices imported from other cultures. It was obvious that few of them, or any other Westerners, had ever journeyed beyond the horizons of the rational mind unaided by a drug explosion. So, in the spring of 1969, I set out for India, mostly on a hunch that I would find there a concrete way, and teachers who could explain to me what was going on. In the next year and a half, I actually got to India twice. I also got to Pāli and Nepal, Greece, Brooklyn Heights, Vancouver, Afghanistan, and a lot of places in between. It was like a long drunk that goes on for such a while that you forget why it started. Traveling became the ultimate intoxication, an endless psychedelic that made the question I couldn't answer inessential. But as I roamed around the world, I gradually noticed among my fellow pilgrims the same confusion that existed back home, the same tendency to mistake drug-induced mental obliteration for insight into the unknown, sloppiness for freedom, and sensuality for spiritual discipline. By the time I returned, I agreed with the ex-Beatle who sang, "The dream is over." The 70s had begun, and on my return to America, I didn't recognize it as the place I'd left. The spiritual movement seemed to have died a-borning. Frustration had replaced bliss. Hitchhiking had become dangerous, and long hair was no way to tell a friend. It was as if everyone who had ventured along an uncertain path had become frightened and had turned back to the main road. The pilgrims had drifted into rock festivals and organic restaurants with tenuous connections to the original quest, which were easily forgotten. My friends, now either militantly hedonistic or intent on security, were repairing their drug-blown consciousness with careers in law or business. Cocaine dealers and hip businessmen were much more popular than spiritual teachers. The whole scene made me uneasy. From my confused wanderings around the world, something indefinable had emerged to reinforce my initial vision of inner freedom as consisting of more than just diversion or entertainment. But the sense of ease, peace, and contentedness that I had discovered in open-ended living proved as transitory as that I had experienced through pills. I soon found myself back in Cambridge, married, in school again, studying Sanskrit, and trying to find in books, from a safe distance, descriptions of the world that still eluded me. I tried to practice yoga, but it had little relation to the life I was leading. Permanent expatriate status seemed to be the only condition I could bear. So I put all my efforts into making enough money to finance a trip of indefinite duration around the world with my wife. Spirituality would have to be moved to the back burner for a while. Then, one day in the summer of 1972, while sitting in my gallery of imported art on Cape Cod, I was surprised to receive a phone call inviting me to a meditation course in Western Massachusetts. The guy on the other end of the phone was someone I had met briefly on my first trip to India, and had bumped into a few times since on the streets of Cambridge. He spoke in a quiet, matter-of-fact tone about friends who had just returned from India, where they had practiced a form of Buddhist meditation with a teacher named Goenka. They had discovered that there was an American in California who had been trained in this practice in Burma some years before by Goenka's teacher. They had contacted the man, and he had agreed to come to their farmhouse to give 10 days of meditation. My friend thought I would be interested. "It's called Vipassana meditation," he added, "and they say it's really practical." The strange name rang a bell, though I told my friend I would call back after asking my wife whether she could run the gallery in my absence. I knew I would be there.
Pariyatti, a nonprofit 501c3 organization, offers a wide variety of books, eBooks, videos, and audiobooks about the teachings of the Buddha, the Pāli language, and Vipassana meditation. Browse our complete catalog at www.pariyatti.org.